For tonight's presentation is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and it's about the Blue River. I've been playing around on the Blue for about 30 years in Kansas City. Larry was playing on the Blue earlier than that because he grew up in Kansas City. You guys will know Larry from his time here behind the microphone, and so I don't often have an opportunity to greet you and thank you for coming and introduce you to our speaker this evening, Larry O'Donnell.
Hey. Well, thanks for coming out. A great crowd. A lot of interest in the Blue River, I see. Which is interesting because I did grow up here in Kansas City, and I didn't know what the Blue River was. I grew up on Indian Creek. We knew Indian Creek. We didn't know where it went. Never heard of the Blue River. You know, the Missouri River, we drove across to go see Grandma. They taught us all about the Nile River. It's supposedly the only river that runs north, when the Blue River, right here in Kansas City, also runs north. Covers 270 square miles. It's bi-state, which is good and bad, especially when you get to agencies. 3 counties, 10 public school districts, over 1 million people, 42 miles long. So it is, out here, you're at the Overland Park Arboretum, 179th and 69 Highway, and it goes all the way to the Missouri River. About half and half in each state, but mostly the headwaters on the Kansas side. This is where it comes into the Missouri River, and we've changed it, just as we've changed the Missouri River, to control flooding, which means basically increasing its flow capacity. So here is the river channel. There's 435. This is the Bear Factory. The old channel actually went this way and emptied into the Missouri River. That was an issue for backup and flooding. This is all levee here now. So the new channel is shorter and a more direct route to the river. People have used the Blue Valley for thousands and thousands of years. This is Indian Mound Park, which if you go up to the northeast and go as far as you can up top there on, what is that, Gladstone Boulevard, where the old Natural History Museum is. To that far northeast corner, you will find this Indian mound. It was excavated in the 70s by amateurs. They filled it in after that. Nobody's done anything else on it. They kind of feel like the site was contaminated because it wasn't done properly. But we can see what it is. There's nobody buried in it as far as they can tell. From the top of that, this is what you see. So that's why they had that mound up there, so they could, as an outlook over the entire Blue Valley. When Lewis and Clark got here, the landscape was quite a bit different than it is today. It was mostly, along the river, wetlands, oak savannas. Savannas are basically prairie with a few large oaks. They're like the edge between the woods and the prairies. And prairies. So most of the trees were just along the rivers and streams. And it was a lot of basically prairie. This is where the woods met the prairie. It was quite a bit different. They say these days in Missouri, we have the same number of trees as we always have historically, but pretty much none of them are where they used to be. So we've cut down lots of them. We've gotten rid of a bunch of the pines down in the Ozarks, and we've planted a bunch of different stuff. So we've totally changed the landscape, even when we're keeping the amount of greenery the same. Blue River Valley, people in it thousands of years. The Civil War, there were several battles of import there. You're here all the way up here at the Missouri River. Main Ford, the main ones you hear about, Byram's Ford is a big one, and Russell's Ford. out by Minor Park. But Byram's Ford is probably one of the bloodiest turkey shoots in the war. Basically, one side was on top of the hill with cannons, and the other side was trying to cross the creek and through the fields, so they were just fodder. But a lot of Civil War importance all along this river, as you can imagine, running through the middle of town. This was really one of the major geographical obstacles in town. As we were wont to do back then, we started developing right on the edge. Rivers were transportation. You got your goods to and from. They were an easy method. It was before railroads. Little Blue Valley, we started industrializing it as early as the mid-1800s, late 1800s. This is Kansas Bolt and Nut Company on Independence Avenue, where it crosses the Blue River. That's the Blue River is this line of trees back here. Kansas Bolt and Nut Company, through a long series, eventually became Armco Steel. So this is that site. This is where Armco Steel was. It was Kansas Bolt and Nut Company, then it became Sheffield Steel. This was all way out of town at the time. So this was a whole nother town. They had, the city of Sheffield was there, which was basically for the steel industry. And of course, built right next to the river. Totally different river back then. Believe it or not, this is from the Missouri Valley Room from the Kansas City Public Library. This is the Blue River. And most of this stuff is from Independence Avenue and north, probably maybe 20 blocks. Houseboats, pleasure craft. I mean, you would never, I mean, we're talking the concrete channel now. We're talking down there where where nut and bolts is, and it's all industrialized. This is what it used to look like. But had problems then too, because as soon as we got here, as soon as we start changing the landscape, we cut down the prairie, it loses its ability to absorb water. We put in hard surfaces, so we have a whole lot more runoff. So we've changed the way the river works, and you get a lot more fluctuation in water levels. That's the same boathouse sign that we saw earlier, and the river was here. You can see what would, I mean, now these guys were prepared for it. This bridge here, we're going to see that a lot in these pictures. This is kind of the defining bridge, and you're able to tell where you're at. But this is Independence Avenue. Same bridge. Water levels fluctuated greatly. You can see here some of the issues. This is dock and boathouse there. These are all the boats piled up from a flood that they'd had. But a lot of them were prepared for this kind of thing. There's the bridge. Unbelievable. I can't even, you just can't even, you go down there and see that, and you don't even know where that would be, how that could possibly be. But it was houseboats, summer boats. This was, they were way outside the city limits, so this was your summer home. This is up in Swoll Park, paddling canoes. This is all channelized reach now. There's that bridge again, more boats. And just lots of use. There's I don't know if that's the same one, but there's another boathouse there underneath the bridge. Problems with flooding. More of it in Swoll Park, which these early pictures, we do cleanups on the river. We walk this river. We know this river. I couldn't begin to tell you where this is, even though they tell me it's in Swoll Park. I don't know where that rock is. More damage. Falling in all the time. Stairs coming down from the bridge, though. Same bridge. This is They call this the concrete reach. Paved. I've also heard it called the corridor. But they did get most of the junkyards off of the edge of it. You can see the river's changed a little bit from what it was. No place to sink your boathouse there. But along with all that, and part of the paved reach, and all the industrialization, floods. So this is wire rope. They are at Manchester Traffic Way, which is Blue River, and I believe it's 23rd Street. 60 employees in 1961 flood. And there are so many floods that they're hard to keep track of. Here's another one in 1990. This is the Leeds plant. We are probably on top of the railroad track that goes along Manchester, looking that way, easily a half mile from the river. With all of those issues, and back in the early years, we were fortunate enough to hire a gentleman named George Kessler, Parks Department did, to help them lay out the city and lay out the parks. He did a lot of work in Paris. I think he did Washington, D.C., world-renowned. This is Kessler's plan for the Blue River. I believe this is Independence Avenue here, right here. And this is where most of the boathouses were going. Kessler's plan leaves the river where it is, gets to here, actually turns this into a lake. This is Blue Valley Park right now, this area right here. And this parkway, this is going to be a road all the way into Swole Park with amenities, lake, a usable river all the way up and down. 1912. Parks Department passed that plan, but then World War I came along, and that blew their budget. So it never happened. It never happened, but it was okayed at one point. So it wasn't until the 60s, really, when they started looking seriously at what they were going to do, and what the Corps of Engineers got a hold of it, and how can we stop all this flooding that's going on, this threat to life and property. They came up with the 5 Lakes Plan. Let's see, this is the state line here. These are those headwaters. So 4 of these lakes are in Kansas, and one of them is on the state line. This is on Tomahawk Creek and on Indian Creek. They come in all the way down here. They didn't have anything on Brush Creek, but all of these lakes were designed to stop the flooding there and be able to handle the 100-year storm. Kansas didn't want it. Actually, Kansas approved it at first, but then a small vocal group of landowners out here decided their property was too valuable to put a lake on. Well, they were right, actually. These are multi-million-dollar homes out here now in southern Johnson County, but that didn't solve our flooding problems. In the 70s, they came up with a plan. They were going to try and carry the 100-year storm, basically this carry up to 35,000 cubic feet of water per second is the 30-year storm. So, I mean, well, we saw flooding back there in 1910, okay? They finally got to actual construction on this plan, and this is the way the Corps works. They've got a very complicated process. First you have to have a feasibility study, and then you have to have estimates and another, I don't know, where are we going to get the money for that? What about the construction? They've tried to streamline that, and they've changed a lot of it. But in this case, All right, the plan, we came up with the plan in the 70s. They started construction in 83, and just recently the channelization project was completed. And it carries the 30-year storm. Actually, probably carries more than that with the studies that USGS have done. Once you channelize a river, you're making the river shorter. You're basically increasing the speed of the water. You're going to downcut more, and what am I trying to say? It's going faster, so it's going to be deeper. It goes faster. It changes the hydraulics of it, and basically you have to do things like make it wider to accommodate the amount of water that's coming in. You want to armor the banks because it's going faster as it downcuts. And so, that was the point, the 30-year storm. As they channelized it and the water started flowing faster, even though they designed it for the 30-year storm, it is now conveying more like the 40-year storm or the 50-year storm because it's going that much faster. And so even though this more water is coming in, it's going down the system faster. That's about all we can do with them these days when they're totally industrialized like the Blue River. This is the paved reach. And here it is in 76. This is actually at flood stage. This is full. This is what it looked like then, and this is what it still looks like because this section did not get channelized, did not get any kind of construction on it, mainly because the steel plant, the property owner, was too close. They were concerned about what might be found here. They really didn't want to give anybody permission to dig on their property. Just a whole set of reasons. Basically, this right here needs to come down. These two buildings here, they're not being used. They're old. And then that would allow this to be turned back to green. They consider this project done, so that'll probably actually never happen. Before the flood control project, this is where Brush Creek comes into Blue River, just north of Blue Parkway at Coal Mine Road. And you can see there was a lot of degradation here, sloping banks, trees falling in. This is it after the channelization project, and this is it handling the flood control. This is actually what they call the top tier. Same area, I think Brush Creek is right there. But basically this whole channel is a two-tier system. So you've got the river, you've got this level here where these guys are, and then it goes up to the upper level. And theoretically, you're never going to get above that upper level. But this two-tier system gives the water more room to spread out and to handle higher flows. And this is what it ends up looking like after they completed it. Now, I don't have a picture of what it looks like today, but all this rock is not exposed anymore. The river probably comes up to here. There's a lot of dirt and stuff in there, and it's green down the edges here. But you can see armored bank everywhere. And they did things like removing the lower bridge at Blue Parkway. You can see how narrow that was. And just imagine the amount of flow that was restricted just by that bridge. This is that same area, the Blue River corridor. So where are we at? Right here is Brush Creek, and that's the north. And so this is south of Brush Creek. This is Blue Parkway. This is actually that the lower Blue Parkway bridge that they demolished. All wooded riparian corridor all the way down along the stream. Well, they had to make more room in the channel, so tear down all the woods. Make that double-tiered channel, make more space here for it to hold water, and then restore the trees. Yes, it is cheaper and easier for them to tear down all the trees and then plant new ones than to try and to design around it. There just wasn't enough land here. I mean, you know, in hindsight now, we're not letting anybody develop in the floodplain these days, so we're not going to run across any of this stuff anymore. I mean, we've planted, I don't know, 2,000 trees along here. Now they're only bare root seedlings, so, and if you can keep the mowers off of them, they have a chance to grow. But this whole site here eventually will not even approximate what was there. What can I say? There's no way. I mean, you know, so a healthy stream, or most streams, non-prairie streams, have woods along the sides of them, and they shade the water, and that's where the fish hang out in those spots there. They destroyed all of that, but they did end up putting some back in. At Byram's Ford, which is just north of 63rd Street, is where the channelization project was slated to stop. At this grade control structure here, that, now, I thought it was $10 million. Somebody told me the other day it was $50 million. Needless to say, it was millions of dollars. Huge concrete structure with all of this surrounding and the tie-in. It would have basically destroyed the entire Byram's Ford battlefield. And so it was the Civil War Roundtable that went to bat for it and got it reduced. And this was a major thing because they started back in the 70s. They had a plan. Once they develop a plan, and they have to stick to that plan. That was the way the Corps worked. By the time we got to this, adaptive management was the word of the day. And basically it was because of the cost difference, 10 million, 3 million, the way it looked and what it did, changing this gray structure to green, making it more friendly. Based on, because this is actually, this kind of stream restoration came out of the Army Corps of Engineers research laboratory in Vicksburg. This is something they didn't know about in the 70s, but they knew about now. Originally, they would not have been able to change the plan to incorporate this without a whole nother 12-year process. But they have changed their process now, and so they were able to incorporate this, save quite a bit. And these are, there's several of these, and this is rock armoring the banks. The stream going through here, you can see the bubbles, so it's shallow. That's a riffle there. What happens when you channelize and it's going faster and it's cutting down the bottom? It will continue to cut the bottom until it runs into something hard, a grade control structure like this, or bedrock. So they instead put in a series of these grade control, these rock structures here, and that effectively does the same thing as this. Big difference. Great for the stream, great for Byram's Ford, that whole area there, and great for the Corps of Engineers. Congratulations to discovering adaptive management. Back to the paved reach. This is it, handling a storm. But that's basically all we're doing now is trying to get this water out of here. And so this is, I'm not sure which bridge this is. Might be 23rd Street, but this is the lower tier here. It's banks armored underneath the bridge so that all this force doesn't cut it out. But even now, and what was it last summer, 2 summers ago? We had the 200-year storms within a month. This is the lower bridge. This is the upper bridge at Blue Parkway. This is not what I thought this was Stadium Drive. I have seen Stadium Drive like this now, still though. And that's where the road that leads into Leeds. But those guys too, that own those buildings and own those businesses down there, we're going to Blue River stakeholder meetings, and finally at the completion of this, they said, you know, it rained 2 inches last night and I didn't even get out of bed. Before, inch of rain, they were down at their factory putting up sandbags, trying to keep that water out. And this is why. These are some older pictures. This is, where are we? I believe this is Armco Steel here. Nuts and bolts, whatever you want to call it. And so, this is down here, and this is all of that. You can see how all the S-curves going back and forth, and you can see rivers, this is the way they naturally work, is they form those S-curves to dissipate the energy of the water. And when there's more water than they can handle, then they go up over their banks. They were getting backups all along here and everything flooding around there. Basically cut off a bunch of this stuff right here to improve flow. And it's because it was so industrialized. Here it is in the 60s. You can see there's all kinds of industrialization up close. Here it is, the completed project. A bunch of this stuff is gone now. There's green space here. The channel is much wider. You see this, you've got this little channel in just that area there. This is that first tier up to the rock here, and then the second tier. A lot more conveyance. And you can see it's straighter than it was. The new channel holds the 30-year storm. This is Stadium Drive, the bridge going across it. And that's the train. There's the same train. This is basically the back of the Leeds plant. And there's another Derby gum, I think, is down there. Farther out south, that was part of the channelization project. One of our other big areas on the Blue River is the Bannister Federal Complex. Now, this is pretty interesting. I never knew this. This is the Bannister Federal Complex in 1922. This is a dirt race car track built in the bottoms. They abandoned it, kept flooding and warping the wood track. Whitney, and then I think Bendix, Allied, Honeywell, and Honeywell finally moved out, and now a developer has it, and everything is being torn down, and they're doing some kind of mixed-use development there. Along with all of that is all kinds of pollutants associated with all of those manufacturing processes and what they did with them at the time, what they're trying to do with them now. There's PCBs, I don't know what all there is. They've done all kinds of remediation on it for years. They were still getting PCBs coming out of the pipes going into Indian Creek. Basically found that it was in the tar that held the pipes, the storm drain pipes together, had residuals in there. They ended up just abandoning all of those lines. But there's still stuff underneath the buildings. They don't know. They don't know what all is there. There's been, 70 years of development, World War II. So it's becoming a big mixed-use area, and there's the Blue River there in 95th Street. There's trail along there now. There's because it was the bottom land, the soggy bottom. All of this area here, it flooded several times. I know it flooded really bad in '51, but I couldn't find any of the pictures of it. Basically, they've got levee all along here. You go down Bannister Road, they've got giant flood walls with floodgates to protect all of that, which at this point I think they've done enough work that it's not an issue anymore. But further upstream, so Bannister Complex is here. This is Dodson Industrial Park. This is on the north bank. This is the west side, northwest side of the Blue River Road. It goes along here. This is 71 Highway. Prospect Avenue is here. And so this is all Dodson Industrial Park. And this all along here is levee, which they just got total funding for, and so that'll be completed probably within the next 2 years. They're doing lots of dirt work over there now. They have to acquire the land, which they've done, and then start digging, and then deal with the things that they're finding that they hadn't expected. And then this is the other big flood control. This is Swope Industrial Area. This is Swope Park here, Heart of America Golf Course, Blue River Road. 75th Street. So Swope Industrial is at the very end of 75th Street where it meets the Blue River. The Blue River goes around it here. It flooded terribly, and it now has total funding too for this. They moved the channel a little bit. It was going through here and cutting up close to this building. They moved the channel out a little. They've armored that bank. There are plans for a flood wall all along this side. The rest of this line is all levee. Even across 75th Street, which will eventually be closed, there's railroad tracks right there. They're doing a flyover bridge. So instead of the railroad being an issue and having to try to close that section off, they're having a bridge that's going to go from here and come around here and come into the park this way, over the railroad tracks. City's building that. They have funding for it too. They've started it. They put the fill in. The fill is supposed to sit for at least a year before they start doing any kind of foundation work on it. But I can tell you those people were extremely happy when that finally happened. That Liver's Bronze right there, they moved in there about 30 years ago with the promise of flood control. Everybody there had promise of flood control. And at the time when they were first doing this project, and back in the 70s, they looked at would it be cheaper to buy everybody out, and decided it wasn't. But the project carried on for so long that people just couldn't stand it anymore. They couldn't have their business flooded constantly. So a lot of them moved out. With the project being complete, more of them are moving back in. There are a lot of people working on the Blue River now. A lot of nonprofits working. They're all working under a single brand, Renew the Blue. Everybody partnering for the same thing on different projects. So Little Blue River Watershed Coalition is doing restoration at Oxbow and Blue Valley, where Kessler's Lake was going to be. They cut that in half, and so now it's an Oxbow. We're removing all the honeysuckle and putting appropriate plants back in there. A little bit farther south where Brush Creek comes in, that whole area is municipal farm, and Heartland Conservation Alliance is working on that with several other partners. Broy's Grow has food plots there. Heartland's putting in some wetlands, and eventually they want to have some small city farms in there. There's Blue River Rescue, which is in its 29th cleanup, 29 years of cleanups, Project Blue River Rescue at Lakeside Nature Center. At this point, they started out cleaning up down the street from the Nature Center. Now they do 22 miles of river from the mouth all the way to the Kansas state line. Probably 30 sites a year, 500 to 1,000 volunteers every year, 50 to 100 tons of trash, 300 tires if we blink, 1,000 tires every year. Our biggest year was 1,300 tires. A semi-trailer truck will hold 1,000 tires. A lot of traditional dumps have been handled, and the main thing now is stormwater and all that floatable trash that comes in. And then Blue River Road is a major dumping area. The city has recently hired 5 more litter control officers and have cameras up, so they're trying to do, it's a big city, there's a lot of dumping sites, but they're trying to do more about it. So we're hopeful for that. We have been able to block off a lot of accesses where people typically dump using rocks and logs. And then other habitat restoration, Blue River Corridor out by Minor Park, which is right along the side of the river. There's also Blue River Glade, which is basically above the river, opposite from Swope Park Industrial. Also there's Rocky Point Glade in Swope Park. All of that Kansas City Wildlands does, habitat restoration. And then one of our latest efforts here, Alex George Lake, which is, I think now they're turning it into a wetland. It was a lake for a long time. As an issue with any urban lake, silt is always a problem, and eventually those lakes fill in. So when faced with the dilemma of what to do with this filling in lake, they decided it would be best to put it back to really what it was. So there's habitat restoration going on out there. And Heart of America, I got Heart of America fly fishers. They adopted it first. They've been doing honeysuckle cleanup on there for, I don't know, years and years and years, along with part of Blue River Rescue. But now Heartland Conservation Alliance is working on it. And that's about it. And I'm going to, when's the workday, Jill? When? March 16th. March 16th at Alex George Lake. One thing I didn't get in here was the road falling in, the banks falling in. They had identified 8 spots along the river. And we're trying to get the Corps of Engineers involved with it because it is a federal flood control project, and so they have a stake in protecting their infrastructure. They threw out 2 of them as not being part of the river's fault, but there are 6 spots still identified. The Corps is working on plans to handle that, probably pretty much armoring banks at those particular areas. But there was a landslide on Blue River, I don't know how many, 5 years now that it's been closed between 95th Street and 110th. So Alex George Lake is south of the landslide. So if you want to go to Alex George Lake, you have to get to it from Red Bridge Road and Little Blue River. Eventually that thing will all open up. There's bike trails on it now. A lot of people using it, but I don't think anybody's ever going to put a houseboat on it again. I think we will eventually get some canoes on it.
Give us time. Well, I would like to thank Larry very much for his fascinating presentation. And with that, we'll take your questions. Okay, bye. Oh, somebody's got to have a hand. Here you go. Yeah, for Michael. Yeah, sure.
While you were talking about some of the projects that are ongoing right now, you mentioned things they didn't expect to find that were slowing the progress. Could you talk about that a little bit, or if you have any knowledge of it?
I'm not sure which progress.
Oh, near the Swope Park where they're building the, I forget the word for it, I'm sorry, but,
Oh, the Swope Industrial Park?
yes.
That one, they haven't, there was a dump next door to it. They pretty much know everything around it. Dodson Industrial Park is the one that they've found things in the bank there because of all those businesses along there that have been there for years and years, and they've changed. Some of them would just back up to their back of their lot and dump. You know, and typically, historically, you throw it in the river and it goes away. You know, I mean, we always used the river used them for trash. So it was fairly common practice. You know, Kansas City, the Missouri riverfront is full of hazardous waste sites. Berkeley Park was a Superfund site. You know, there were lots of battery companies, so there's lead contamination and just all kinds of stuff that, you know, they were disposed of, most of all that stuff was disposed of properly at the time. We just didn't understand the consequences of how that, all of that and how it would add up. I can say that down there at Blue Parkway, when they were just north of Byram's Ford and they were digging out, and there was an old small dump down there, small, it was a municipal dump, but they found a entire truck full of trash. The flatbed truck, bed of the truck still full of trash, the entire truck buried. So, unexpected things like that.
Larry, you talked about the first slide was showing the watershed, and you've got a big chunk of the watershed in Kansas, and we know that area is being heavily developed. There's a lot of development that's going in there, so the expectation is that runoff there is increasing. We know that, of course, climate is changing. You mentioned that a couple of years ago we had the 2 100-year storms within a couple of weeks of each other. What does the future look like with regard to flooding? I mean, have they been able to solve it, in those upper reaches? And if not, what do you want to see happen, bearing in mind as well that you're a conservationist,
Well,
more concrete, is that the answer?
No. What we would actually like to see is what they call the water quality storm be required to be infiltrated on site. The water quality storm in this area is, what is it? It's, I believe it's 1.2 inches. 90% of our rain events are that or less. When it rains, what they call the water quality storm gets the first flush, and so that's the water, the first water that runs across and picks up most of the pollutants. If we don't have an increase in the amount of water going into the system, then the system will stabilize. It'll do it itself. Even those banks that have fallen in, stuff will start to grow on them. But when we keep increasing the amount of water, it just exacerbates all these problems. Now, currently they require detention, and they require the 10-year storm to be detained, which means basically that even though we've got all this more water going into the system, it won't go into the system any faster than it normally would. So they basically it extends the storm. But also, it's only handling the 10-year storm. So the real issue, all those small storms, is not even really being addressed water-wise. Now, Kansas City has a development code now that they do require the water quality storm to be infiltrated on site. So it has to soak down into the ground like it did before they did development. But and there are issues out in Johnson County with that, and Johnson County itself didn't want to pass some of these things like a stream buffer ordinance because they said Overland Park was going to annex all of them anyway, and so they just use Overland Parks, which they do. But the Five Lakes problem would have solved it. We talk about Brush Creek and the flood on the plaza, and a dam at State Line would certainly back up the golf course over there in Mission Hills, but it would save a lot of infrastructure on the other side. This is part of the bi-state dilemma. There are some hopeful things. In Kansas City's consent decree with the EPA, this is a whole nother issue. Kansas City, I didn't even touch on combined sewers. So from the Missouri River to 87th Street and from the state line to the Blue River are what you call combined sewers. And so the stormwater and the sewer water is in the same pipe. There are areas where when they get too much, when too much stormwater comes in, there'll be a wall in the middle of the pipe. The water will rise up over it and mix, and there won't be enough for the pipe to contain, and so it overflows directly into the rivers and streams. 6 million gallons a year with the combined sewer overflows in Kansas City. They've entered into a consent decree with the EPA. I think we're in year 5 of it now. It's a 25-year decree to get that down to 6 overflows a year. Starting with green infrastructure and reducing the amount of stormwater that goes into the system, and eventually finishing with what they call deep tunnels for all the rest of the water to hold a place. They're 200 feet down, about 20, 30 feet in diameter. The one along Brush Creek is going to be, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile long. And they're designed to hold the water, just like the detention, only these will actually be detention, and then take it to the sewer plants, but they have to hold it because the sewer plants can't handle all that much water all at one time. And so deep tunnels are the final answer, but the first answer is to reduce the amount of flow. So part of that consent decree is that Kansas City has to work with Kansas and Johnson County on the Blue River, have a Blue River agreement, and basically try and do a management plan for the entire river. We'll see how that comes out. We've been working on that. The first Blue River Summit, I think, was in 2001. We didn't have an order from the EPA that we had to do it. It's a court order now. Deadlines are set in writing, and they have to follow those. So while the combined sewers and the overflows are an issue, and it would be great if we never had that issue, it certainly has brought a lot of attention to runoff and the quality of our rivers and streams and what we can do with them, and past development practices, current practices, and what we need to do. So, short answer, yeah, Kansas is a problem. We're working on making them less of a problem, but the river can only handle so much, and they've widened that channel as much as they can, and so they just need to work on reducing the amount of flow. Anybody else?
Yes.
So Larry, first, thanks for your leadership on this issue for a long time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Secondly, the question I have is if we could make you king for a year and you could dictate what would happen here or what could happen to accelerate the restoration of the Blue River watershed, what would be the top 3 things you would initiate?
I can't believe someone asked you that question. Just saying.
My wiseacre response is more beer. Well, all right, so Kansas is a problem. In Missouri, pretty much all the along the river is publicly owned, either by Kansas City or Jackson County. That makes a big difference, having that property in public ownership, being able to continue from one space to the other, do trails, greenways. We really need that in Kansas, and we need that in that upper watershed. We need that where those headwaters are. So it's all those headwaters coming together that end up causing the problems farther downstream. So stream setback ordinances in Kansas, the infiltration of stormwater, and probably the biggest thing is just basically educating the public so they understand what the issues are and how this works. They understand what they're seeing when it floods, why it's flooding, and how they can avoid it and what they can do personally to avoid it, along with all that water that goes along the ground and gets pushed into the system during a storm. It picks up everything. So by using fertilizers properly, keeping yard waste where it belongs, picking up after your pet, keeping nutrients out of the stream, trash, all of that are personal things that people can do. And I think that educating people just so that they understand the decisions that they're making. I mean, we can make everything concrete. It's extremely expensive, $100 a foot. Green is about $10 a foot for Armory River. And it's very difficult to maintain because water just does not do what you tell it to. It does what it wants to do, and it goes around obstacles. It goes underneath obstacles. That Bannister plant, there was I forget what it is, HCLs or something that are in the ground. They put an iron filing wall, buried it in the ground as a filtration. They didn't tie the ends in. It's perfect. It just hit the wall and went around it. So they did all of that, and I mean, you hear it with the Missouri River too. You can't control it. You can try to manage it. And managing it really is understanding how it operates and operating within its parameters and not trying to make it operate within our parameters. So it's that basic understanding of how rivers work and the value of them that we just really need to let people know about.
Any other questions for Larry this evening? He'll be here for a little bit, so you can accost him on the way. Oh, Jill. Jill's got last call.
A little bit less of a question and just something I wanted to share with the group here. I think you might be interested. So EPA is holding a public hearing session on waters of the U.S. It's the only hearing for this in the United States. It's going to be in Kansas City, Kansas at the Reardon Convention Center on the 27th and 28th. So I just encourage folks to go on their website or their Facebook page and register and come by and show the EPA what you think about your water. Tomorrow? Yes. Tomorrow and Thursday. Thank you.
Again, thank you everyone for coming this evening. Larry, thank you for doing a great presentation. I'm certain Larry will be holding court at the bar. Thanks for coming, guys.